Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. I'm Suzanne Atwell. In this episode, The Year in Review, a look back at the people, issues, and events of 2019. The defining theme, the changing face of Sarasota. Downtown development is booming. The skyline is dotted with construction cranes and luxury condos. Chic hotels with rooftop bars are attracting young, upscale professionals. The Rosemary District has been transformed and is continuing to grow. Construction of the quay is in full force. A third Ritz Tower is already standing. So what happened? Who's moving in? Where's all the money coming from?
Well, I compare it to 6 years ago, where there's been a tremendous amount of evolution, but I really compare it to, what would it be, 18 years ago, when I was here with, really 19 years ago, I was here with DPZ, Dwayne Peter-Zyberk, working on the downtown plan. And it's very satisfying as a planner. You know, most of the plans we do are 20-year plans. We're looking forward 20 years. And that was one of them. And it's astounding to see, even with a recession in the middle, right, how much change has happened in that time. My particular responsibility on the team during that plan was the Rosemary District, which it's night and day between then and now. And I have to say, I mentioned this on the tour, like, we were creating hopeful plans and images of what could happen there. We didn't have a lot of hope. I mean, you always have aspirational planning, but you don't necessarily expect it to happen. And granted, 18 years is a long time, but in planning time, it's a blink of the eye. And so much more than we had imagined could happen, has happened in that neighborhood.
The market is incredibly vibrant. I was here at the last uptick of the market when the last round of condominiums were all developed. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like I'm seeing today. Mm-hmm. The demand is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. We are attracting people from, I would say, all over the world, but it's really mostly all over the country.
But there are a lot of beautiful, you just mentioned, people are coming here from California. There are a lot of beautiful cities in the world with the same amenities. Why here?
They're attracted to all of the offerings, not only the culture, but
mm-hmm.
the outdoor cafes. In any given day, I can come right out my door. I can get a manicure, a pedicure. Sure. I can take a yoga class. Mm-hmm. I can go to an opera if I want to, or a matinee. Yeah. I can have a beautiful lunch. I can get a fresh coffee. I mean, everything is here. And I think because we've increased the density in downtown, we're now getting the critical mass that we need to support the commercial endeavors. Mm-hmm. You've got to have the people here to support the commercial enterprises. And really, at the end of the day, for those of us who have been here a long time, I think we find it kind of refreshing. Our downtown is vibrant.
Well, that's a great point, because you want to transition so that you're not going from being maybe a CEO of a company and very active, or a college president or something like that, and you come here and then you play golf all day. People are not satisfied, it seems, with that anymore.
Well, and real estate and luxury real estate goes well beyond bricks and sticks.
Exactly.
It's really about creating a sense of community, mm-hmm. and I think that's the thing that people are so attracted to here. Mm-hmm. You're right; they're not some people would play golf all day,
sure.
but generally,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they might play golf in the morning, but then they might want to be on a board in the afternoon, go to the theater in the evening. So, it is this community. There are a lot of opportunities to give back. And yes. The people that I see in the luxury market are charitable, they're educated, they're well-traveled, mm-hmm. and they want to have a meaningful life, and they know they can do that here.
Private condos and hotels are not the only big projects underway downtown. Known as the Bay, the public park that is being built on either side of the Van Wezel is the largest public land use project in Sarasota history.
Our first phase is about 9 to 10 acres, mm-hmm. and probably the centerpiece of our first phase will be an amazing pier that goes out over the water, a sunset pier, where folks can come and watch the sunrise, watch the sunset, perhaps pull their boat up to, maybe eventually take a water taxi to, but that will be the anchor that goes out over the water. We'll have a reimagined Boulevard of the Arts, designed in a way for all modes of transportation, cars, bikes, people, families with double strollers. We'll have a mangrove bayou that will be restored. We're removing the exotics. We're going to dredge it to improve the water quality. We're going to have a canoe kayak launch. And then lastly, we're going to have a 3 or 4 acre flexible upland green area that we're calling the Living Learning Laboratory. And so we're going to do events of all sizes. We're going to have pop-up food and beverage concession. We're going to have Friday night movies. We're going to have yoga on the lawn and test a lot of different things to see what resonates with our community. Learn from that and then apply that learning as we build the rest of the park out in phases.
On the community side, my view is the community is any citizen, any resident, full or part-time, any visitor, anybody that lives close enough or even far away who, when they come to Sarasota, wants to visit this public park, which will be loaded with natural resources and amenities. They are the community. They are the community. The users of the park are ultimately the community. So yes, I think the community does have a stake in the Bay Park. If you look at the Van Wezel demographics and you look at the zip codes where Van Wezel patrons come from, there are a lot from Longboat Key, but there are, I bet 40 or 50% of them come from outside of the city of Sarasota. If you look at who uses the public boat launch, you know, when we could dig into the data, we found out that well over half were from Sarasota County, Manatee County, and even further away. So a lot of what goes on in a city public park serves a community that's well beyond just the citizens. Obviously, we want to serve the citizens of Sarasota first and foremost, but others will come.
And I think from the get-go, this has been important, that you have this park, an urban park, which people talk a lot about, what a glorious urban park. And that word is important. This is a park. Because a lot of folks have thought this first development that you're doing, just going to put in some high-rise condos, and it's not the people's park. Well, it is.
It is, and at the risk of embarrassing you, I remember our first 2 meetings when you were still on the commission, and we had a great conversation at the second meeting, and the conversation was about what do the commissioners not want to see on the 53 acres. And I always tell people, getting clearer about what's not in is as and sometimes more important than getting clear about what's in. And so, you know, no major retail, no high-rise residence, no commercial buildings, right? So there still will be plenty of amenities here, a wide range of fitness, health, recreation, arts, culture, all kinds. But the kind that works in open public space. So we could have 9 to 10 acres of park, open to the public as early as the spring of 2021. So we won't make 2020, which was the original Bayfront 2020 vision, but I think all things considered, if we're open in early 2021, that would be great for our community and our city.
The Bay is not the only public land use project we covered this year. The iconic Bobby Jones Golf Course is another big public land use project that city commissioners have acted on. Born in 1902, Robert Bobby Jones is one of the most important names in the history of golf, on and off the course. His Sarasota connection began in 1925 when the city's first 18-hole course opened. Now, the Sarasota Bay Country Club, it originally opened as Whitfield Estates Country Club. As part of the marketing plan, Jones was hired as a sales manager. During that same time period, the city of Sarasota bought 290 acres of private land from the Palmer Estate to build the course that would adopt the famous golfer's name. Legend has it, Jones got a new car as payment for the use of his name. Today, nearly 100 years later, there are questions about the future of the course, and more importantly, the conservation of the land for public use.
As we began the renovation process and got into the details, we really began to understand what a huge environmental role this property plays not just to the city, but to the whole region. And there is property that drains here all the way from the UTC Mall. The storm drainage drains all the way from the UTC Mall. So when we began to look at the engineering and the course renovation architect's plans, there's almost $2 million worth of pure environmental improvements just to help purify the stormwater. But then the deeper we got into this, and I had the Audubon Society audit the property. There are over 45 species of birds. There are hundreds and hundreds of trees on the property. So it really plays a triple role. Provides urban wildlife habitat, helps us retain and cleanse stormwater runoff, and then of course the trees eat the carbon. So it's a huge environmental role. And some of the focus began to move in that direction, to understand that and how important it was to keep this asset in play in perpetuity. And when you look at the growth in Florida and the projections and the demographic trends, it appears we're going to continue to grow as a region and as a state for the foreseeable future. So over time, open space is going to become priceless. So now we've actually figured out a way to do it. Put it in a conservation easement in perpetuity, so it's there forever. And some of the critics of the strategy are saying, but you're going to tie the hands of future city commissions. Well, that's the idea, actually.
I think if you could point to any city that you think is well designed, any citizen points to any city in the country or the world that they believe is well designed, we will be able to point to a city that has well designed and thought out places for public use. The data has shown that people come here, number one reason is for the beaches, which I would argue is the environment. If the beaches aren't clean, if we have bad water, people aren't going to come. So that's environment. And number two reason they come is because of what they can do outside during the day. And our vision for Sarasota County is where the citizens are informed about and absolutely desire the public open spaces. So that's why we've participated with extending the Legacy Trail and had a hand in that. That's why we are trying to conserve over almost 6,000 acres down in Northport, Orange Hammock Ranch, so that we have citizens who know the importance of conservation and the importance of natural places, but as well can get on those natural places and enjoy what we have here. So I see for the city of Sarasota, as well as the county of Sarasota, more places for people to get together, recreate outdoors, and enjoy.
Bobby Jones is one of the many enterprise zones in the county, but none compare to Sarasota Manatee International Airport.
The Sarasota and Manatee County area has grown by 20,000 residents a year for the last 5 years running. Now that's a small city being created every year. And airlines are finally realizing that that kind of growth here, and also as you've seen the congestion on the roads, especially I-75, airlines tend to look at distance not in miles, but in time. And I remember years ago we went off to see Southwest Airlines, and actually the distance between Sarasota, Bradenton, and Tampa is about the same as between Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. And Southwest was at both those locations, and they said, yeah, well there it takes at least 90 minutes to travel between those two destinations, and you didn't have that kind of time issue here. But it's slowly getting to that. Over the last 15 years, we've invested about $300 million in this facility. Again, without charging the local taxpayer a dollar. And on top of that, we retired our debt from when they first built this terminal. That was about $150 million when you factor in the interest, plus invested $300 million. So almost $500 million over the last 15 to 20 years into this terminal. Without borrowing a dime. We're one of the few airports in this country that's totally debt-free. Certainly the growth at 40% can't continue, but I think we'll see significant growth over the next couple of years, maybe in double-digit range, maybe 10%, 8% or whatever, over the next couple of years. So we'll have to look at when will there be a triggering point that we might need another wing on the terminal. You might notice that it's airside B is the center one. That's because the old master plan has an A and a C at each end as well. So when does that get triggered, and how much is that going to cost? But right now our main concentration is on developing what we call our out-parcel holdings. We have 2 industrial park holdings. One across on Old 15th Street is about 55 acres. We own 76 acres on Talavas near 301. We have a bunch of area here in the front along University that we want to convert where the car rentals are now. We want to consolidate that and build offices and restaurants and more hotel space and that type of thing along there. All of this pays revenue to the airport, which keeps us self-sufficient and off the tax rolls of asking the taxpayer for money, and all of it creates jobs and economic activity. As I said, you can take the Orioles, Pirates, Braves, Nathan Benderson Park, and the Arts, and combine all those, and there's still hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars behind us in economic impact on the community.
In addition to enterprise zones, private non-for-profit corporations and foundations also contribute to our quality of life. One of the biggest stories of the year was the failure of the city to approve a request from Selby Gardens for a multi-million-dollar master plan.
There were 3 key challenges that we wanted to tackle. The first is that Selby Gardens has the world's best scientifically documented collections of orchids and bromeliads, and right now they are on the ground in the flood zone in aging infrastructure. Hurricane Irma really put an exclamation point on our need to act, so we knew that we had to do something to preserve our collections. The second challenge is really one about accommodating our visitors. On peak days, we turn away hundreds of visitors, and you may know that Selby Gardens was, and a master plan has never been implemented for Selby Gardens, and the land was acquired in parcels over time, and we're missing some of the key amenities a public institution needs, like parking, orientation, other infrastructure. So we knew we needed to tackle that. And then finally, the third challenge is really about protecting and preserving our history. So as I said, our land was acquired in parcels and it's privately owned. And at any time during Selby Gardens' 40-plus year history, the land could have been sold for development purposes. And part of this plan, one of the best things about the plan is that we're codifying all of our land as a botanical garden in perpetuity, and at the same time preserving our historic structures for the years to come.
So when everything is done X years from now, how will this all separate Selby from other botanical gardens? What will be the brand here?
So really, as I said earlier, we have the world's best collections in our area. And we have the world's best talent in our area. So really the one thing we have been missing has been the proper infrastructure and implementation of a master plan. So by implementing this plan, really we will claim our international status as the world leader in our area. And in addition, we are able to really set a standard for what a botanical garden should be. By having this cutting edge green architecture, we really will be an international leader for others to look to and to follow. And in a way, because we had never fixed our infrastructure before, we're going to springboard to the forefront of how you can do this and how to be a model for other institutions. Since we're a public institution and we have more than 200,000 visitors a year, we can teach people about the benefits of green architecture and sustainability and how to mitigate issues in an urban environment.
It's about the leadership in the community gradually evolving Sarasota over time to things we take for granted. I mean, I've forgotten about the fact that at the heart of our downtown used to be a Goodyear tire store. Nothing wrong with Goodyear tires, but is that really what we wanted at the heart of downtown? And people were upset about changing that and putting a library there. Because if you aren't constantly refreshing and improving the assets within a destination, you wind up going on a downhill spiral.
If the Commission had approved Selby's master plan, it would have ensured the land would remain a botanical garden in perpetuity. Effective governance and public leadership is essential to a growing community, and that includes infrastructure. Traffic in downtown is a mess because roads that should have been built or expanded years ago cannot handle the volume. The pump station is still not done and millions over budget. But the biggest infrastructure story of the year, the Bee Ridge recycling plant.
There are a few different lawsuits or actions that are currently going on right now. One is being developed by the Florida DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. They're doing an enforcement action that we call a consent order. So the state agency wrote the county a warning letter several months ago when it became clear to them that the spills coming from the Bee Ridge reclamation pond and also the Bee Ridge collection system were really significant. The second is the citizen suit action that was brought by Suncoast Waterkeeper. That is a Clean Water Act lawsuit that is currently pending in federal court. So there are two different actions, two different levels, really. One is at the federal court system, and the other is an administrative action in the state of Florida. They've been in violation for quite some time. I think back to 2010 probably, they started recognizing, and they should have even before that, when doing long-term planning, recognize the likelihood of problems at Bee Ridge. Why they didn't adequately plan and undertake actions that would avoid these types of spills is complicated, and I'm really flabbergasted as to why action wasn't taken earlier. And I think that there's dysfunction and has been dysfunction at several different levels. I think that the staff in the utilities department failed to recognize the situation, failed to communicate with their counterparts in the environmental or stormwater section of the utility. There was inadequate communication with the county commissioners who I believe didn't understand the severity of the situation. So I think most of the failures had been at the staff level. Although I would say that the county commission has to have ownership over these types of failures. And like many local governments throughout the state of Florida, there's been a lack of investment in environmental infrastructure for many years.
The cost will be very expensive, either getting to AWT standards or in fact retrofitting to AWT, which is again advanced wastewater treatment. Yeah. Many of the plants in Sarasota County today are far above that standards, many times that standard. And it is no doubt one of the premier anthropogenic nutrient sources to our surface waters. In other words, it is a source of nutrient pollution. So the cost will be great, but the cost-benefit analysis is one that I think demonstrates that it would be worth the investment, not only for today, but for future ratepayers and future citizens of this community. The state and the federal government for years had funding programs available to local governments for septic to sewer conversions and for wastewater treatment improvements. The vast majority of those funding sources have been eliminated. And unfortunately in the state of Florida, one of the sources that Sarasota County government used to rely upon, which was the Pollution Recovery Trust Fund, has been depleted to the point of near bankruptcy in recent years because we have not been holding polluters accountable for their misdeeds, and thus there were no fines or penalties being contributed, and now there are no funding resources for local governments such as Sarasota County. So I think we've heard the message from the experts, from the scientists, from the engineers, and it's very clear. These are the improvements that need to be made. We need to focus on stormwater and wastewater in particular. We need to make the improvements, and the data is there, the research is firm, and the time to act is now.
Shortly after our Bee Ridge story aired, county commissioners agreed changes at Bee Ridge are needed, but the process is complex and could take years. Which takes us to our final episode of 2019. On November 6, 2018, voters in Sarasota County decided to change county commission elections from at-large to single-member districts. In doing so, a 59 to 40% majority instantly redefined the competitive landscape. At the center of the controversy, the Board of County Commissioners map and whether the population was evenly distributed between the 5 districts.
After I got into the redistricting issue a little bit, I was contacted by a gentleman named R.N. Collins. He went and looked at this population estimate that was developed by the consultant. And Collins was looking at the methodology that they used for estimating population, because estimating population is very important for redistricting. You need good estimates to be able to even out the population in each of these districts. If your estimates are no good, then the whole purpose of redistricting can be negated, because you don't know that the district lines that you've drawn have equal populations in each district.
One of the things that is very telling is Sarasota County actually has a demographer working for them in their Planning and Development Services Department. Before Mr. Spitzer, Kurt Spitzer and Associates, was given the purchase order to produce the estimates, his methodology was passed around to the staff of Sarasota County. And the demographer raised a question about the methodology and pointed out that if you use this methodology, it will produce bad results, nonsensical results. And when the estimates were actually made, it turns out that our demographer's prediction is correct, that we have a lot of nonsense because of bad methodology.
And then commissioners just started questioning whether they wanted to go with these consultants' maps, and they started talking about, hey, well, we're interested in some of the maps that have been submitted by members of the community. I like how those maps look better, particularly Commissioner Nancy Dietert, Commissioner Mike Moran, and they seized on a map, what they called the Smith map, that was submitted by a member of the public. And so that piqued my interest, and I said, well, we got to go and see who drew this map. You know, the commissioners might use this as the basis for their redistricting effort. Who drew it? Where did it come from? Why was it drawn the way that it was? And so I started asking about that. I asked county officials, I asked county commissioners, where did this map come from? And it took a few days, and then people sent me some information that it was submitted anonymously, and that the name Adam Smith was attached to the map because of a Gmail address that had contacted a county official and notified them of this map submission, and that Adam Smith was really just a name that was affiliated with this Gmail account, but it wasn't a real person. And so I started to look into that, and I said, well, who is behind this Gmail account? Who drew this map? And I started to dig into it and follow some clues. And the clues led me to Bob Wechter. And Bob Wechter is the former head of the Republican Party of Sarasota, who was arrested in 2012 for a political dirty trick. But there are folks who have concerns about the redistricting process. And I spoke to the director of Common Cause Florida. Common Cause is kind of a good government advocacy group, and redistricting is one of the issues that they look at. They try and offer guidelines on redistricting and avoiding gerrymandering. And I was talking to them about the fact that Wechter was able to submit this map anonymously, and the director of Common Cause Florida told me that allowing anonymous submissions, regardless of whether it's Wechter or anybody else, is really not very transparent.
So how do we do this better going forward? Redistricting, particularly if we continue to operate under a single-member district system where those district boundary lines have far greater consequences than just who can run where you live. This is not easy stuff. So going forward, there's a few things that we might consider. One, again, having some sort of nonpartisan or at least balanced bipartisan body have a role in designing some of the maps. And then whether we choose the fair district amendments or something different, but just having our commissioners clearly articulate which principles they're applying and how they're prioritizing them. I think those things would help a little.
In one of the most brazenly political moves in recent times, a 3-2 majority of county commissioners ignored bad data, minority representation, and a dishonest map submission. Instead, they voted to protect their own political interests. As we conclude our year in review, we see a city and county growing, thriving. But a lot of what's happened is not because of government, but in spite of it. Our future is bright, but if our political leadership and forms of government do not keep pace and evolve as the private sector has, we will stagnate. To see this show and all of our past episodes, go to our website, SuzanneAtwell.org, Facebook, or YouTube site. Well, that wraps up another show and another season. We hope you've learned something and enjoyed watching. Until next time, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and we'll see you around town.